the overproduction of cheap corn. Hydrolyzed corn protein, corn starch, just corn syrup, as we had that just corn syrup, hydrolyzed corn starch, corn syrup. Forget that the gods are the Native Americans, the killer of our continent. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're farming the whole acre. Yeah, I did Green Iowa. Little oasis. Right out in the middle of nowhere. You're really going to plant corn? Really?
Going to turn into the corn syrup that's used to make a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi. Your acre's going to turn into the Twinkies and Bean Dogs that we snack, so your acre's going to get a lot of use.
These are all made out of corn right through here.
The onions are made out of corn.
Yeah, it's 60% of the ration is corn. These animals evolved not in feeding corn. You feed a lot of corn, animals can get in trouble. A bunch of crap out here for something to eat.
Carbs. All that surplus corn goes somewhere. And a lot of it's coming into our bodies. One of the tenets in America is America belongs and demands cheap food.
Hey, do you guys have any wild game on the menu? You have, like, nuts and berries? I'm trying to eat more like a hunter-gatherer.
Well, as my adult self came to learn and repeat many times to many audiences, there might be some reasons to question a goo-based food system. Let's face it, these are some of our least healthy foods. Corn-fed beef fattens cheap burgers, fries are dunked in corn oil, and of course high-fructose corn syrup is the nutritional boogeyman of America right now. Yet to many, despite this enormous agricultural productivity, this flexibility in product, and above all, cheapness at the cash register represents a spectacular triumph. And for a species that has known hunger in some form for most of our existence, it's hard to argue against this. I mean, 10,000 years ago, when we came up with this idea of agriculture, it turned out to be a pretty good hedge against the hunter-gatherer lifestyle and the uncertainties that went along with it. And then a century comes along, the 20th, in which we really begin to figure out how to utilize all these fossil fuel calories that we found in the ground in the previous century. And you put those two things together, a 10,000-year bug born of deep memories of food scarcity, and this petroleum-fueled capability, and the game changes. By the end of the 20th century, we were getting 6 to 10 times more yields from the average cornfield. And here in the United States, we used government policy to reinforce this sense of security. That's what Earl Butz helped do in 1973. But I think, especially in context of what we just heard at the lunchtime presentation, I think it's really important to think about the perspectives of other generations and other perspectives. For many, this industrial might in agriculture was incredibly, incredibly remarkable. And for Earl Butz, let's think about it. This guy graduates from Purdue University, 1935. He is the first graduate of the then brand new program in agricultural economics. And he grows up on a farm, and for him, reducing chores and making productivity is his life's mission. But in 1935, it's the middle of one of our nation's greatest scarcities. Now, look at Kurt and Ian. These guys graduate from school in the middle of an obesity epidemic. And I think that's why when we begin to think about the future, it's really important to think about the parameters that different generations have faced and the parameters that we face. I fully accept, for Butts' generation, that those things are hard to foresee. And that's one of the problems with the future. It keeps changing. And what one generation does to build themselves a better future can really alter the next generation's ability to build any future at all. However well-intentioned our plans, one certainty about contemplated future seems to be that there are almost always unforeseeable and unintended results. I think for anyone who grew up when I did, in the middle of the Cold War, to imagine that the end of this sort of perma-standoff between the US and the Soviet Union, this permanent nuclear rivalry, just to imagine that it could possibly end when I was a kid was impossible. And then to imagine that when it did end, that the results could be anything but good was even further unimaginable. I will admit that if it weren't for the fact that we were trying to out-Sputnik the Russians, I don't think we would have gotten space food snacks. But other than that, the Cold War was a kind of a scary time to grow up. The same teacher that told me about the jetpacks and the metric system once led us down to the basement to show us where the yellow and black circular signs were for the fallout shelter. And I was a kid that asked a lot of questions, and I remember saying to him, "Mr. Buckheit, exactly how is this basement going to protect us from a Russian radiation bomb?" That's what I called it. And he just looked at me blankly. I remember that fear, and I remember thinking that when this ends, everything will be better. Fortunately, the Cold War did end. And when the wall came down, I was with friends. It was just after I'd graduated from college, and we celebrated in a way that indicated just how unimaginable this had been. But equally unimaginable was that with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the geopolitical landscape it bisected, would return the specter of another ancient human phenomenon that everyone thought was in our distant past. Humans transported in bondage, traded as property, forced to labor without compensation under the constant threat of violent reprisal. These are the things we associate with 19th century lithographs. Here in Ohio, in particular, with your proud local tradition of abolitionism, it feels especially harsh to contemplate that this phenomenon has come back. But it has. After the Berlin Wall fell, the world economy moved swiftly towards a global fluidity. Suddenly you could buy a toaster in a mall in Pittsburgh that had been assembled in Indonesia with components from Mexico and an enamel cover that had been painted in China. Goods, materials, and capital now flows freely across the planet. But not so people. If people want to move or migrate or find work in more developed economies, the doors are often closed. And the channels that the post-Cold War world helped create this desperate disconnect between things that could move freely and people that couldn't. So it's a little bit after this clip.
We face because of globalization.
Stay with us.
Can you get, oh, I guess that's pretty, is that right? Oh, it looks like somehow that time code is not. Do you want to just play? Let's just play, because I think right after that.
It took more than 30 days by boat, and we ran into 2 storms. There were a lot of gangs on board. They fought one another, sometimes just for food.
We were all afraid of dying. We were all afraid the boat wouldn't hold the weight of so many people because it was overloaded.
It's been called the shadow of globalization. In search of a better life, millions of people are smuggled across international borders every year. The profits have never been higher, and the human cost is escalating, with alarming numbers forced into bondage as prostitutes or slave laborers.
If your life's on the line, you will actually take a huge risk and pay a smuggler every penny you have to gain safety. And regardless of how high you raise the penalties for smugglers, all they would be doing is finding ever more covert means of moving people, and we're actually going to see more people dying and more people being...
Thank you. The point is, that, and the point that he was making, I think, is that human migration is as old as humanity itself.
His family.
And that's the end of his sentence. And that people will travel toward opportunity as naturally as water seeks its own level. Once sheep-herding peoples would continually go wherever there was grass, and today, people will seek jobs and opportunity where those jobs exist. This is among our most powerful drives. And where that movement is prohibited by laws or fences, someone provides a means to evade those laws or fences. Modern slavery was a term I was uncomfortable using at first. My family comes from the Mississippi Delta and was likely involved in the old school version of slavery, and I was reluctant to use that term. But the term absolutely applies. Modern slavery or human trafficking arose when mafias that were transporting migrants across borders, what we call human smuggling, concluded that what they had in possession was a very saleable commodity. These vulnerable people in their charge had no papers, no knowledge of where they were or where they were going. Instead of just dropping them off, these mafias reasoned, why not put them to work? Unlike, say, guns or drugs, the kinds of things that have been illegally trafficked for decades, people could be bought and sold and traded and exploited over and over again. I think it's one more chapter.
A transfer point for trafficked women bound for points abroad. 2 weeks after Antonio Martinez had struck his deal with the Coyote and Hidalgo, he and about 40 others were on a bus headed toward the U.S. border.
Some of the people on the bus live near my home. I knew them and their families. We made a plan that we'd all stay together.
Martinez and his group were taken to a sprawling border camp in the Sonora Desert, the last stop before crossing. Already the itinerary that had been described to Martinez was being altered.
They separated all of us. They told our Coyote, we're paying you to help us get across. Why are you sending us with someone else? He said, he'll take you across. Call me on this number when you get to the other side. You'll be taken to California.
Martinez and his small group were passed on to a smuggler named Chino. They crossed the border into the Arizona desert.
We walked for 3 days and 3 nights. The water and food ran out because we were told to only bring enough for 1 day. We found a lot of things there. Hats, shirts, backpacks. We figured people had left them because they were tired. I'm not sure. From then on, the Coyote started following a line of telephone poles. To take us to Tres Puntas. Where they were going to come for us.
Martinez's group hid for 24 hours, waiting for their contact to arrive. They were then taken to a drop house in Tucson, Arizona.
They'll bring them into houses, and they'll hold them generally until the smuggling fee is paid. Some of the houses are set up pretty well so that they've got wire on the windows and dead-bolted doors.
With increased border vigilance, the use of coyotes has risen and become a much bigger business.
People are treated as more of a commodity. Sometimes